the last nurse to leave Ward C at St. Mercy Hospital on November 14, 2008, locked the door at exactly 11:47 p.m. By morning, the hospital's official records showed the ward had never existed. 9 patients had died there in the previous 6 weeks. Their autopsies disappeared from the morgue 3 days before the state investigation began. If stories like this make you question what really happens behind hospital doors, hit that like button and subscribe, because some medical truths only surface years later. Dr. Sarah Chen received the ward closure memo at 6:23 a.m. on November 12, 2008, 2 days before Ward C would cease to exist. The email came from hospital administration, not from her department head, not from the chief of staff. Just administration, with a generic hospital domain. Effective November 14, 2008, Ward C will be permanently closed due to structural renovations. All patients currently housed in Ward C must be transferred by 11:59 p.m. on the closure date. No exceptions. Sarah had worked at St. Mercy for 12 years. She'd never seen a ward closure handled this way. No advance warning, no departmental meetings, no transfer protocols. Just 48 hours to move 37 patients. She walked down to Ward C that morning, her badge scanning into the unit as it had for the past 4 years. The ward looked exactly as it always had: clean linoleum floors, functioning equipment, freshly painted walls. If structural renovations were needed, where were the engineering reports? Where were the safety violations that would mandate such an urgent closure? Nurse Margaret Santos was updating patient charts at the central station. Margaret had been on Ward C longer than anyone, almost 15 years. She looked up when Sarah approached, and her expression was one Sarah had never seen before. Not confusion. Fear. Dr. Chen, did you get the memo too? About the closure? Yes. Margaret, what do you know about these structural issues they're citing? Margaret glanced around the empty hallway, then leaned closer. Doctor, I've been asking maintenance about renovations for weeks. Nobody knows anything. Yesterday, I called the engineering department directly. They have no work orders for Ward C. No scheduled renovations. Nothing. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. What about the patient transfers? Have you received the protocols? That's just it. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. The transfer orders are strange. 12 patients are being moved to other facilities entirely. Not just other wards, other hospitals. The families weren't consulted. The insurance authorizations happened overnight. I've never seen transfers processed this fast. Sarah pulled up the patient roster on her tablet. Ward C housed a specific demographic: long-term care patients, most on Medicare or Medicaid, many with complex conditions that required specialized attention. Not the kind of patients typically moved on 48 hours' notice. What about the deaths, Margaret? The question hung between them. In 6 weeks, 9 patients had died on Ward C. Not unusual for a long-term care unit, except these weren't expected deaths. The mortality rate had spiked by 340% compared to the same period the previous year. The families have been asking questions, Margaret said. Mr. Rodriguez's daughter wants to see the autopsy report. Mrs. Patterson's son hired a lawyer. Dr. Chen, I've been requesting those autopsy reports for 3 weeks. The morgue keeps saying they're processing them. Sarah accessed the hospital's internal system and navigated to the pathology records. 9 recent deaths from Ward C should have generated 9 autopsy reports. The system showed the requests had been filed, the bodies had been processed, but the final reports were marked as pending review, all 9 of them. Who performed the autopsies? Margaret checked her notes. Dr. Williams handled 6 of them. Dr. Kumar took the other 3. Both said the reports would be ready within the standard 72 hours. That was almost a month ago. Sarah tried calling Dr. Williams. His office said he was unavailable. She tried Dr. Kumar. Also unavailable. The pathology department secretary, when pressed, said both doctors were dealing with a backlog and couldn't provide a timeline for the pending reports. At 2:15 p.m., Sarah walked the ward herself, speaking with each of the remaining 28 patients. Most were stable, some improving. None appeared to require emergency transfer. She documented everything: vital signs, treatment responses, medication schedules. If this closure was legitimate, there would be a paper trail somewhere. If it wasn't, her phone buzzed at 3:47 p.m. Text message from an unknown number. Dr. Chen, we need to talk. Coffee shop across from hospital. Come alone. Someone who knows about Ward C. Sarah stared at the message. In 12 years at St. Mercy, nothing like this had ever happened. She screenshotted the message and forwarded it to her personal email. Then she deleted it from her phone. At 4 p.m., she walked across the street to Morrison's Coffee. The place was nearly empty, the afternoon lull between lunch and dinner crowds. A woman in her 50s sat alone in the back corner booth, wearing scrubs under a jacket. Sarah recognized her as Linda Torres, a nurse from the hospital's morgue. Linda gestured for Sarah to sit. Her hands were shaking slightly. Dr. Chen, I need to tell you something, but if anyone asks, this conversation never happened. Linda, what's going on? The autopsy reports. They're not missing. They're being suppressed. Linda pulled a manila envelope from her jacket. I made copies before they disappeared from our system. Sarah opened the envelope. 9 autopsy reports, all completed, all signed by Drs. Williams and Kumar. All showing the same disturbing pattern. Each patient had died of apparent cardiac arrest. But the tissue samples showed something else. Traces of potassium chloride in concentrations that shouldn't occur naturally. Not enough to be definitively ruled a homicide, but enough to raise serious questions. Linda, this suggests. I know what it suggests. Linda's voice was barely audible. But there's more. Yesterday, Dr. Williams and Dr. Kumar were both reassigned. Effective immediately. New positions at different hospitals. Their employment contracts included non-disclosure agreements and substantial severance packages. Sarah's mind raced. 9 patients with questionable deaths. Missing autopsy reports. Doctors suddenly reassigned with NDAs. A ward closure with no engineering justification. Who else knows about this? Just me. And now you. Linda stood up. Dr. Chen, I've worked in that morgue for 8 years. I've never seen anything like this. Someone wanted those patients dead, and someone with serious power is covering it up. Linda left the coffee shop first. Sarah sat alone, staring at the autopsy reports. Outside, St. Mercy Hospital rose against the gray November sky, its windows reflecting nothing. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the message was from hospital administration. Dr. Chen, please report to the executive conference room at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Regarding Ward C transition. She looked at the timestamp. 4:23 p.m. They'd sent the message while she was reading the autopsy reports. Sarah gathered the papers, placed them back in the envelope, and walked toward her car. As she crossed the street, she noticed a black sedan parked near the hospital's main entrance. 2 men in suits sat inside, watching the building's exits. She had 36 hours before Ward C would cease to exist. 36 hours to figure out why 9 people had died and who was willing to kill to keep it quiet. Sarah arrived at the executive conference room at 7:58 a.m. on November 13th. She'd spent the night reading through the autopsy reports Linda had given her, cross-referencing them with the patient files she'd printed before leaving Ward C. The pattern was undeniable. All 9 patients had died between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. during shift changes when nursing coverage was at its lightest. The conference room was on the hospital's executive floor, a place she'd only been twice in 12 years. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. 3 people were already seated at the polished mahogany table. James Morrison, hospital CEO, Dr. Elizabeth Grant, chief medical officer, and a man in an expensive suit she didn't recognize. Dr. Chen, thank you for coming, Morrison said, gesturing to a chair across from them. This is Mr. Patterson from our legal department. Sarah had never seen Patterson before, and she'd dealt with hospital legal issues many times. She sat down, placing her hands flat on the table to keep them from shaking. We wanted to discuss your transition off Ward C, Dr. Grant began. As you know, the ward is closing tomorrow night for essential renovations. I've reviewed the engineering reports, Sarah said. There are no structural issues documented for Ward C. No safety violations. No work orders filed with the maintenance department. The 3 exchanged glances. Patterson leaned forward. Dr. Chen, the hospital occasionally faces situations that require discretion. Ward C's closure is part of a broader operational restructuring that involves sensitive financial considerations. What kind of financial considerations would require closing a profitable ward with a 48-hour notice? Morrison's expression hardened. Dr. Chen, I'm going to be direct with you. St. Mercy is facing significant financial pressures. The current economic climate has forced us to make difficult decisions about resource allocation. Ward C's patient demographic represents a substantial financial liability. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You're talking about Medicare and Medicaid patients. I'm talking about a business reality, Morrison replied. Long-term care patients with complex conditions generate enormous costs with minimal reimbursement. Private insurance patients are transferred to other units. Government-funded patients are more challenging to maintain profitably. So you're closing an entire ward to avoid treating patients whose insurance doesn't pay enough? Patterson intervened. Dr. Chen, we're offering you a very attractive package. A promotion to Chief of Internal Medicine at our facility in Colorado. Substantial salary increase. Full relocation assistance. The position comes with certain understandings about maintaining confidentiality regarding operational decisions made at St. Mercy. Sarah stared at him. You're trying to buy my silence. We're offering you a career opportunity, Dr. Grant said. And we're hoping you understand that sometimes healthcare administrators must make decisions that individual physicians might not fully appreciate. What about the 9 patients who died? The room went silent. Sarah could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Dr. Chen, Patterson said carefully, patient mortality is an unfortunate reality in long-term care facilities. The deaths on Ward C were thoroughly investigated and determined to be from natural causes. I've seen the autopsy reports. Another silence, longer this time. Morrison leaned back in his chair. Dr. Chen, I'm not sure what you think you've seen, but I can assure you that all proper protocols were followed. The families of the deceased patients have been informed and are satisfied with the care their loved ones received. Sarah pulled out her phone and accessed her voice recorder app. She'd started recording when she entered the room. Are you stating, for the record, that St. Mercy Hospital considers 9 deaths in 6 weeks, all occurring during minimal staffing hours, with autopsy reports showing elevated potassium chloride levels, to be the result of natural causes? Patterson's face went white. Dr. Grant started to speak, but Morrison held up his hand. Dr. Chen, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps you should take some time to reconsider our offer. The position in Colorado is available until the end of this week. And if I don't take it? Then we'll have to discuss your future at St. Mercy in different terms, Patterson said. Dr. Chen, making unfounded accusations about patient care could constitute defamation. It could also represent a violation of patient privacy laws. The legal ramifications could be quite serious. Sarah stood up. Are you threatening me? We're offering you options, Morrison said. Choose wisely. Sarah left the conference room and took the elevator down to Ward C. The hallway was eerily quiet. Most of the remaining patients had already been transferred. Only 8 remained, and they were scheduled to be moved by evening. She found Margaret Santos in room 314, helping Mrs. Goldman pack her belongings. Margaret, we need to talk. They stepped into the hallway. Sarah looked around to ensure they were alone. They just offered me a job in Colorado, with a substantial salary increase and a non-disclosure agreement. Margaret's expression didn't change. They offered me early retirement yesterday. Full pension, plus a bonus equal to 2 years' salary. I just have to sign a paper saying I won't discuss Ward C operations with anyone. Are you going to take it? Dr. Chen, I've been thinking about this all night. 9 patients died in 6 weeks. All during night shift changes. All when I wasn't here. Margaret's voice cracked. I keep thinking, what if I'd stayed late? What if I'd checked on them during those shift changes? Could I have prevented this? Margaret, this isn't your fault. Someone was deliberately. I know. Margaret wiped her eyes. But proving it is different from knowing it. And I have grandchildren, Dr. Chen. I can't afford to lose my pension. I can't afford to fight a legal battle against the hospital. Sarah understood. Margaret was 58 years old with 15 years of service. The early retirement package would set her up for life. Refusing it could mean losing everything. What about the families? Don't they deserve to know the truth? The families are being told their loved ones died of natural causes. The hospital's lawyers are handling any questions. Most of these people don't have money to fight St. Mercy in court. Sarah's phone buzzed. Text message from Linda Torres, emergency. Meet me in the hospital parking garage, level B2, northwest corner. Come now. Margaret, I have to go. But promise me something. If anyone asks you questions about Ward C after tomorrow, you don't know anything about our conversations. Margaret nodded. Dr. Chen, be careful. I've worked here 15 years, and I've never seen them move this fast to shut something down. Whatever happened in Ward C, they're scared of it getting out. Sarah took the elevator to the parking garage. Level B2 was dimly lit and mostly empty at this time of day. She found Linda Torres standing near the northwest corner, next to a concrete pillar. Linda looked like she hadn't slept. Dr. Chen, thank God you came. They're moving faster than I thought. What's happening? This morning, 2 men came to the morgue. They said they were from corporate security. They took all the physical evidence from the Ward C autopsies, tissue samples, blood work, everything. They had proper authorization papers. Sarah felt cold. What kind of authorization? Legal order from the hospital's executive committee. It stated that all materials related to recent Ward C deaths were to be transferred to an external laboratory for quality assurance review. Did you keep copies of anything? Linda pulled out a small flash drive. Digital copies of the lab results. I saved them to this before the files were wiped from our system. Sarah took the flash drive. Linda, you need to get out of here. Take that early retirement offer if they give you one. This is bigger than we thought. What are you going to do? Sarah looked around the empty parking garage. Tomorrow night, Ward C would close forever. The patients would be scattered across different facilities. The staff would be reassigned or retired. The physical evidence would disappear into some corporate laboratory that probably didn't exist. I'm going to document everything I can in the next 30 hours, Sarah said. And then I'm going to decide whether to be a doctor or a whistleblower. As Linda drove away, Sarah noticed the same black sedan from yesterday, now parked on level B1. The men inside were watching the elevator exits. She had 26 hours left to uncover the truth about Ward C. Sarah returned to Ward C at 9:47 p.m. on November 13th, 8 hours and 13 minutes before the ward would officially close forever. She'd spent the afternoon documenting everything: patient transfer records, staff schedules, medication logs, and maintenance reports. Now she wanted to observe the final night shift, the time when all 9 deaths had occurred. The ward felt different in the darkness. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down the hallways, and the usual bustle of daytime activity had given way to the quiet efficiency of overnight care. Only 3 patients remained: Mrs. Elizabeth Cowan, 73, with advanced COPD, Mr. James Rivera, 68, recovering from a stroke, and Ms. Dorothy Klein, 81, with late-stage diabetes complications. Nurse Patricia Webb was working the night shift alone, unusual for Ward C, which typically required 2 nurses for overnight coverage. Patricia had been on the Ward C night rotation for only 3 weeks, starting just after the death cluster began. "Dr. Chen, what brings you here so late?" Patricia asked when Sarah approached the nurses' station. "Just wanted to check on the final transfers, making sure everything's properly documented." Sarah pulled up the duty roster on her tablet. "Patricia, you're covering the entire ward by yourself tonight?" Administration said it was acceptable given the low census. "Just 3 patients, all stable." Patricia's voice was steady, professional, but Sarah noticed her hands trembling slightly as she organized medication carts. Sarah had researched Patricia's background that afternoon. She'd transferred to St. Mercy from Chicago General Hospital in October 2008, just weeks before the Ward C deaths began. Her previous employment record showed a gap of 6 months between Chicago General and St. Mercy, unusual for an experienced ICU nurse in a tight job market. "How are you finding Ward C compared to your previous positions?" "It's quieter than I expected. Long-term care is different from acute care." Patricia avoided eye contact, focusing intently on medication preparations. Sarah noticed something odd about the medication cart. Patricia was preparing injections for all 3 remaining patients, medications that weren't on any of their charts. She moved closer to get a better view. "Patricia, what are those injections?" "Prescribed sleep aids. Dr. Harrison ordered them this afternoon to help the patients rest during the transition stress." Patricia showed Sarah a set of orders dated November 13th, 3:22 p.m. Sarah examined the orders. Dr. Harrison's signature looked correct, but something felt wrong. She accessed the hospital's electronic prescribing system on her tablet. No sleep aid orders appeared in any of the 3 patient files. "Patricia, these orders aren't in the electronic system." "Oh, Dr. Harrison said the computer system was down this afternoon. He wrote paper orders." Patricia held up handwritten prescriptions. "I was told to file them electronically after administration." Sarah photographed the paper orders with her phone. The handwriting looked like Dr. Harrison's, but the timing was suspicious. She'd spoken with Dr. Harrison at 4:30 p.m., and he'd made no mention of prescribing sleep aids. At 11:15 p.m., Sarah excused herself and walked to the supply closet at the end of the hall. She called Dr. Harrison's home number. "Bill, it's Sarah Chen. Sorry to call so late, but I need to verify some medication orders you wrote for Ward C today." "Sarah, I haven't written any Ward C orders in over a week. I've been reassigned to exclusively handle emergency department consults." Sarah's blood went cold. "Bill, there are paper orders here with your signature, dated today at 3:22 p.m. Sleep aids for the 3 remaining patients." Silence on the other end. Then, "Sarah, I was in surgery from 2 to 6 p.m. today. I couldn't have written orders at 3:22. And I never prescribe handwritten orders, always electronic entry." "Someone forged your signature." "Sarah, get out of there." Right now. If someone's forging orders for medications on Ward C, you're not safe. Sarah ended the call and returned to the nurse's station. Patricia was no longer visible, but the medication cart remained in the hallway. Sarah approached it carefully and examined the prepared syringes. 3 identical doses of clear liquid in 10 milliliters syringes. She used her phone to photograph the medication vials. The labels read potassium chloride 2 milliequivalent/ml, exactly what the autopsy reports had shown in the tissue samples of the 9 deceased patients. Patricia appeared from room 308, where Mrs. Cowan was sleeping. "Dr. Chen, is everything all right? You look concerned." "Patricia, I need to see the medication orders again." "Of course." Patricia handed over the papers, but her demeanor had changed. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Sarah examined the orders more carefully under the nurse's station light. The handwriting was good, very good, but the pen pressure was inconsistent, suggesting someone copying rather than naturally writing. More importantly, the paper was standard hospital stationery, but the order format was wrong. Dr. Harrison used a specific template that included patient allergy information. These orders omitted that section entirely. "Patricia, where did Dr. Harrison give you these orders?" "At the nurse's station, around 3:30 p.m. I was at the nurse's station from 3:15 to 3:45 p.m. today. Dr. Harrison wasn't there." Patricia's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw her glance toward the medication cart. "Dr. Chen, I think you're confused. It's been a stressful few days with the ward closure." Sarah stepped back from the nurse's station. "Patricia, what hospital did you work at before Chicago General?" "I told you, Chicago General was my previous position." "No, you said Ward C was different from your previous positions, plural. Where else did you work?" Patricia moved around the nurse's station, positioning herself between Sarah and the exit. "Dr. Chen, I think you should go home. You're obviously exhausted." Sarah's phone was in her jacket pocket. She tried to access it casually, but Patricia noticed the movement. "Dr. Chen, put your hands on the counter where I can see them." The professional nurse demeanor was completely gone now. Patricia's voice was steady, controlled, and absolutely cold. "Patricia, what's really happening here?" "What's happening is that Ward C has been serving patients who represent a significant financial drain on St. Mercy Hospital. Patients whose families lack the resources to pursue complicated legal actions. Patients whose deaths can be explained by their existing medical conditions." Sarah felt her stomach drop. "You've been killing them." "I've been solving problems. 9 problems, to be specific. Tonight, I'm solving 3 more, and then Ward C closes forever with a clean statistical record." "The hospital administration knows?" Patricia laughed, a sound with no warmth in it. "Dr. Chen, who do you think hired me? Chicago General didn't let me go because of budget cuts. They let me go because families started asking questions about my patient mortality rates. St. Mercy knew exactly what they were getting when they brought me here." Sarah's mind raced. The hospital had deliberately hired a nurse with a history of suspicious patient deaths. The ward closure was planned from the beginning, a way to eliminate problem patients and then shut down the unit before investigations could gain momentum. The autopsy reports were supposed to disappear entirely. But your morgue friend Linda got nosy, and you got curious. Patricia opened one of the desk drawers and pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Don't worry, Dr. Chen. This will look like a heart attack brought on by the stress of the ward closure. Very sad. Overworked doctor collapses during final patient transfers." Sarah looked toward the hallway exit. 30 feet away, but Patricia was blocking the most direct path. "Patricia, the hospital can't cover up a doctor's death. Too high profile." They covered up 9 patient deaths pretty effectively. Patricia moved closer. Besides, you've been asking too many questions, meeting with people you shouldn't meet with, accessing records you shouldn't access. From administration's perspective, you're becoming a liability. Sarah heard a sound from room 308. Mrs. Cowan was awake and calling for assistance. Patricia glanced toward the room, momentarily distracted. Sarah grabbed the medication cart and shoved it hard toward Patricia, knocking her backward into the wall. The syringes scattered across the floor as Sarah ran toward the exit. Behind her, she heard Patricia shouting into a radio, "Security, Ward C, now. We have a situation." Sarah reached the stairwell and ran down 2 flights to the main floor. Her car was in the parking garage, but they'd be watching the elevators. She needed to get to the main lobby, where there would be witnesses, security cameras, people who could see what happened next. As she pushed through the stairwell door into the main lobby, she saw 2 security guards rushing toward the elevators. They hadn't seen her yet. Sarah walked quickly toward the main entrance, trying to appear calm. Her phone showed 11:53 p.m. Ward C would close in 12 hours and 7 minutes. She had to decide, run and try to expose this from outside, or go back and try to save the 3 patients Patricia was planning to kill. Behind her, she heard the elevator doors opening and Patricia's voice giving instructions to security. "Find Dr. Chen. She's having a psychological episode. She could be dangerous." Sarah made it to her car at 11:58 p.m. and drove directly to the 24-hour copy center on 5th Street. She had Linda's flash drive with the autopsy digital files, photographs of the forged medication orders, and recorded audio from her confrontations with hospital administration and Patricia Webb. If she was going to expose this, she needed multiple copies of everything stored in different locations. At 12:23 a.m. on November 14th, the final day Ward C would exist, Sarah was scanning and uploading files to 3 different cloud storage accounts. She created physical copies for herself, for Linda Torres, and for mailing to investigative journalists at the State Medical Board. As she worked, she tried to process what she'd learned. St. Mercy Hospital had deliberately hired Patricia Webb, knowing she had a history of suspicious patient deaths. They'd assigned her to Ward C, a unit housing primarily low-income, long-term care patients whose families lacked resources for legal challenges. Over 6 weeks, Patricia had systematically murdered 9 patients using potassium chloride injections during minimal staffing overnight shifts. The deaths were designed to look like cardiac events related to the patient's existing conditions. The hospital had planned the ward closure from the beginning, a way to eliminate the evidence, scatter the remaining patients to different facilities, and reassign or buy off the staff with attractive severance packages. The missing autopsy reports, the rushed transfers, the NDA-laden job offers, everything was coordinated to prevent investigation. Sarah's phone rang at 12:47 a.m. Unknown number. "Dr. Chen, this is Detective Maria Santos, State Police. We need to meet immediately. Are you somewhere safe?" "Detective Santos? How did you get this number?" "Linda Torres contacted us 3 hours ago. She provided copies of autopsy reports showing suspicious potassium chloride levels in 9 recent deaths at St. Mercy Hospital. She said you might have additional evidence." Sarah felt a wave of relief. Linda had gone to the authorities. "Detective, I have recordings, photographs, and documentation of systematic patient murders at Ward C. But the hospital is planning to kill 3 more patients tonight, and then close the ward at midnight." "Where are you now?" Sarah gave her location. Detective Santos said she'd be there in 10 minutes with backup units. At 1:03 a.m., 2 state police cars pulled into the copy center parking lot. Detective Santos was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes, the look of someone who'd worked too many cases involving institutional corruption. "Dr. Chen, show me what you have." Sarah spread the evidence across the copy center's work table. The forged medication orders, the photographs of potassium chloride syringes, the audio recordings from her meetings with hospital administration. Detective, they hired Patricia Webb knowing she had suspicious patient deaths at her previous hospital. Tonight, she was preparing to inject 3 patients with lethal doses of potassium chloride. She admitted to me that she's been systematically killing patients whose medical expenses exceeded their insurance reimbursements. Detective Santos examined the documentation while speaking into her radio. This is Santos. I need immediate backup at St. Mercy Hospital, Ward C. We have a suspected serial homicide in progress. Also need units at the home addresses for James Morrison, CEO, and Elizabeth Grant, Chief Medical Officer. She turned back to Sarah. Dr. Chen, we're going back to the hospital. I need you to identify the specific patients in danger and show us exactly where Patricia Webb was preparing the injections. At 1:34 a.m., 3 state police cars arrived at St. Mercy Hospital. The main lobby was nearly empty except for overnight security guards and a few emergency department staff. Detective Santos approached the security desk. State Police. We need immediate access to Ward C. The security guard looked confused. Ma'am, Ward C is closed. Has been since midnight. Sarah stepped forward. That's impossible. The ward wasn't scheduled to close until 11:59 p.m. tonight. There were still 3 patients there an hour ago. The security guard checked his computer terminal. According to our system, Ward C closure was moved up to midnight on November 13th. All patients were transferred yesterday evening. Detective Santos showed her badge. I need to see Ward C immediately, and I need to speak with whoever authorized the early closure. They took the elevator to Ward C. The hallway was dark, with most lights turned off. Sarah's badge still worked on the entry door. Inside, the ward was empty. All patient rooms were vacant, beds stripped, medical equipment removed. Detective, this is impossible. I was here 90 minutes ago. Mrs. Cowan, Mr. Rivera, and Ms. Klein were all here. Patricia Webb was preparing injections. They walked to the nurse's station. The medication cart was gone. The forged prescription orders were gone. Even the computer terminals had been removed. Detective Santos called her radio backup. I need the hospital administrator on duty here immediately. Also need a complete list of all patients transferred from Ward C in the past 24 hours. Within minutes, a hospital administrator arrived, David Kumar, Night Operations Director. Sarah had never seen him before. Detective, I can provide you with the transfer records. All Ward C patients were successfully moved to appropriate care facilities by 11:30 p.m. yesterday. What about Patricia Webb, the night nurse? Kumar consulted his tablet. We don't have any employee named Patricia Webb. Perhaps you're thinking of Patricia Williams? She works in our ICU. Sarah felt reality shifting around her. No, Patricia Webb. She's been working Ward C night shifts for 3 weeks. I spoke with her less than 2 hours ago. Kumar showed his tablet to Detective Santos. These are our complete nursing staff records. No Patricia Webb in our employment database. No record of anyone by that name ever working at St. Mercy. Detective Santos examined the records. Dr. Chen, describe this Patricia Webb. Sarah described her, mid-30s, brown hair, approximately 5 feet 6 inches, professional demeanor that had turned threatening during their final encounter. Kumar nodded. That sounds like Patricia Williams from our ICU. But she's been on vacation for the past 2 weeks. Family emergency in Oregon. Then who was working the Ward C night shift? According to our records, Margaret Santos covered all overnight shifts on Ward C during its final week of operation. Sarah's mind reeled. Margaret Santos, the day shift nurse who'd been scared about the ward closure, who'd been offered early retirement, who'd claimed she wasn't present during any of the suspicious deaths. I need to see Margaret Santos immediately, Detective Santos said. At 2:18 a.m., they arrived at Margaret Santos' home address. The house was dark, with no cars in the driveway. Detective Santos knocked on the front door. No response. A neighbor came out of the adjacent house, wearing a bathrobe. "Are you looking for Margaret? She left yesterday afternoon with a bunch of suitcases. Said she was taking early retirement and moving to Florida to be closer to her grandchildren." Detective Santos turned to Sarah. "Dr. Chen, when did Margaret Santos tell you about the early retirement offer?" Sarah tried to remember the conversation. Margaret had mentioned it during their discussion in Ward C, but she'd been vague about timing. She'd also claimed not to be present during the overnight deaths, but if she was covering all the night shifts. "Detective, I think I've been manipulated. Margaret Santos was the one who told me about the suspicious deaths. She guided me toward questioning the hospital administration. But if she was actually working the night shifts when the patients died, then she was the one killing them, and she used you to distract attention from herself." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Dr. Chen, by now you've realized that Patricia Webb doesn't exist. Neither do the audio recordings you think you made. Check your phone's memory. Margaret Santos is on a plane to a country with no extradition treaty. The 3 patients you thought were in danger last night were transferred safely to other facilities yesterday afternoon. Ward C closed on schedule with no incidents. If you continue to make accusations about St. Mercy Hospital, our legal team will pursue defamation charges. We suggest you consider the generous offer we made yesterday." Hospital administration. Sarah checked her phone's audio recordings. The files from her conversations with Morrison, Dr. Grant, and Patricia Webb/Margaret Santos were corrupted, nothing but static. Detective Santos observed Sarah's growing realization. "Dr. Chen, what exactly do you think happened here?" Sarah looked at the evidence she'd gathered. Linda Torres' flash drive with autopsy results. Photographs of medication orders and syringes. But if Patricia Webb had never existed, if the encounters in Ward C had been with Margaret Santos using a false identity, if the audio recordings were corrupted. "Detective, I have autopsy reports showing potassium chloride in tissue samples from 9 patients who died on Ward C." "Dr. Chen, potassium chloride appears in tissue samples from many cardiac deaths. It's not unusual, and it's not necessarily evidence of homicide." Sarah stared at Detective Santos. "Are you telling me there was no crime?" "I'm telling you that what you've described, a nurse using a false identity to kill patients while manipulating a doctor into becoming a whistleblower, sounds like an elaborate psychological operation. Someone wanted you to believe you'd uncovered a conspiracy." Sarah's hands were shaking. But the ward closure, the missing autopsy reports, the job offers with NDAs, are all standard corporate practices during hospital restructuring. "Dr. Chen, Ward C was legitimately closed due to financial pressures. The Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement rates for long-term care don't cover operational costs. Hospitals across the country are closing similar units." Detective Santos' radio crackled. "Santos, this is dispatch. We've confirmed that Linda Torres never contacted state police tonight. No reports filed regarding St. Mercy Hospital." Sarah felt the world spinning. "But Linda gave me the flash drive. She met me in the coffee shop, in the parking garage." "Dr. Chen, when was the last time you slept? Have you been under unusual stress recently?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She tried to remember the past 48 hours clearly. The ward closure memo on November 12th. The meeting with Margaret Santos about suspicious deaths. The coffee shop encounter with Linda Torres. The confrontation with hospital administration. The late-night encounter with Patricia Webb. But as she tried to focus on specific details, they seemed to blur together. Had Linda Torres really given her a flash drive, or had she found it somewhere? Had she actually recorded audio of her conversations, or just thought she had? Had Patricia Webb threatened her with a syringe, or had she imagined the entire encounter? Detective, I need to see Linda Torres. She works in the hospital morgue. At 3:22 a.m., they returned to St. Mercy Hospital. Detective Santos asked the night security supervisor to locate Linda Torres. Ma'am, we don't have anyone named Linda Torres on staff. Never have, according to our employment records. Sarah pulled out her phone and showed Detective Santos the text messages she'd received. But when she opened her message history, there were no texts from Linda Torres. No unknown numbers. No threatening messages from hospital administration. The last message in her phone was from her sister, asking about Thanksgiving dinner plans. Dr. Chen, Detective Santos said gently, I think you need medical attention. When did you last eat? When did you last sleep for more than a few hours? Sarah tried to remember. The ward closure announcement had come on November 12th. But when she tried to recall specific events before that, her memory was fuzzy. How long had she been working excessive hours? How long had she been under stress about Ward C's mortality rates? I need to see the Ward C patient files. The 9 people who died. Detective Santos accompanied her to the medical records department. The night clerk pulled up the files for Ward C deaths over the past 6 weeks. 9 patients had indeed died. All were elderly with multiple comorbidities. All had died during overnight hours from cardiac events consistent with their medical conditions. All had received appropriate care according to documented protocols. Dr. Chen, these deaths appear to be within normal statistical ranges for a long-term care unit treating patients with advanced medical conditions. Sarah stared at the records. The mortality rate spike she'd calculated. Had she made an error? Had she been comparing Ward C to a different type of unit with healthier patients? What about the autopsy reports showing potassium chloride? The clerk accessed the pathology database. All 9 autopsy reports were complete and available. Sarah read through them carefully. Potassium chloride was mentioned in several reports, but within normal ranges for cardiac deaths. The concentrations she'd thought were suspicious were actually consistent with natural cardiac events. Detective, I was certain these levels were abnormal. Dr. Chen, do you specialize in pathology? Are you trained to interpret toxicology results? Sarah realized she wasn't. She was an internist with limited forensic pathology knowledge. What had seemed suspicious to her might be completely normal to a qualified pathologist. At 4:17 a.m., Detective Santos drove Sarah to the emergency department. Dr. Chen, I'm recommending a psychiatric evaluation. What you've described suggests possible acute stress reaction, sleep deprivation, or other psychological factors. The people you've described, Linda Torres, Patricia Webb, don't appear to exist. The conspiracy you've uncovered appears to be a product of exhaustion and stress. As they walked into the emergency department, Sarah saw Dr. Harrison working the overnight shift. Bill, thank God. I called you last night about the forged medication orders. You remember, right? Dr. Harrison looked confused. Sarah, I haven't talked to you in over a week. Are you feeling all right? You look exhausted. Sarah felt something fundamental breaking inside her mind. Bill, I called you at home. Around 11:15 p.m. You told me you couldn't have written orders at 3:22 p.m. because you were in surgery. Sarah, I wasn't in surgery yesterday. I worked a regular emergency department shift from noon to midnight. And I haven't written any Ward C orders recently. Detective Santos spoke quietly with Dr. Harrison while Sarah sat in a chair, trying to understand what was happening to her. Had she imagined the entire conspiracy? Had stress and sleep deprivation caused her to create an elaborate delusion involving people who didn't exist and events that never happened? Dr. Chen, Detective Santos returned, Dr. Harrison is going to arrange for you to be evaluated. You're going to get the help you need." As dawn broke over St. Mercy Hospital on November 14, 2008, Ward C officially closed. 9 elderly patients had died of natural causes over 6 weeks. 37 patients had been successfully transferred to appropriate care facilities. The unit was closed due to financial pressures affecting hospitals across the country. Dr. Sarah Chen was admitted for psychiatric evaluation, suffering from acute stress reaction and exhaustion-induced psychosis. There had been no conspiracy, no murders, no cover-up. But as the morning shift arrived and began their routines, no one noticed that the hospital's employment records had been thoroughly cleaned overnight. No one questioned why Margaret Santos' house had been emptied so efficiently. And no one wondered why a psychiatric evaluation had been arranged so quickly for a doctor whose only crime was asking too many questions. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen was released from Cedar Hills Psychiatric Facility with a diagnosis of acute stress-induced psychotic episode. The official medical report stated that exhaustion, overwork, and the emotional pressure of Ward C's closure had caused her to experience elaborate delusions involving fictional people and imaginary conspiracies. She returned to St. Mercy Hospital in February 2009 to clean out her office. The hospital had held her position, officially. Unofficially, everyone understood she wouldn't be returning to work. The psychiatric evaluation, while confidential, had been discussed informally among staff. Dr. Chen was now known as the physician who'd had a breakdown during Ward C's closure. As she packed her personal belongings, Sarah found a note tucked inside one of her medical textbooks. Handwritten and signed, it read, "Dr. Chen, check the cemetery records for St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery. Look for recent burials with no listed next of kin. A friend." Sarah had spent 3 months in therapy, convinced that her memories of Linda Torres, Patricia Webb, and the conspiracy were products of mental illness. The therapists had been thorough, kind, and absolutely certain that she'd experienced a psychological break from reality. But the note suggested someone else knew something. On February 18, 2009, Sarah drove to St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery. The records office was small, run by an elderly clerk named Mrs. Patterson who'd worked there for 30 years. "I'm researching recent burials of people with no listed family members," Sarah said, "for a social work project about isolated elderly patients." Mrs. Patterson pulled out burial records from late 2008. "We had several unfortunate cases in November and December. 9 burials, all within a few weeks of each other. All listed as county burials with no family contacts." Sarah's hands started shaking. "Can you tell me their names?" Mrs. Patterson read from the ledger, "Rodriguez, Maria. Patterson, James. Goldman, Elizabeth. Cowan, Dorothy. Rivera, Carlos. Klein, Margaret. Thompson, Robert. Williams, Janet. Santos, Miguel." Those were the names of the 9 patients who died on Ward C. But according to hospital records, all 9 had families who'd been contacted and had made burial arrangements. "Mrs. Patterson, these are listed as county burials, but I believe these people had families." "Oh dear, that would be unusual. County burials only happen when there's absolutely no family contact possible. The hospital provides the death certificates, and if they indicate no family, the county handles the burial." Sarah asked to see the death certificates. All 9 were signed by the same doctor, Dr. Amanda Rivera, whom Sarah had never heard of during her 12 years at St. Mercy. "Mrs. Patterson, do you remember anything unusual about these burials?" Well, it was strange having so many county burials from the same hospital in such a short time. Usually we get maybe 1 or 2 per year. And the young woman who handled the arrangements was very efficient. Young woman? Yes, she said she was from the hospital's social services department. Margaret something. Very professional, but she seemed in a hurry to get everything processed quickly. Sarah felt her breath catch. Margaret Santos? That sounds right. Do you know her? Sarah didn't answer. She photographed the burial records and drove directly to the State Medical Board offices. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was the investigator assigned to her complaint. Dr. Walsh listened patiently as Sarah explained what she'd discovered at the cemetery. Dr. Chen, I understand you've had a difficult few months. Are you certain you want to pursue this investigation? Your psychiatric evaluation indicated some confusion about events at St. Mercy. Dr. Walsh, 9 patients who supposedly had families were buried as county indigents with no family contact. The death certificates were signed by a doctor I can't find in any St. Mercy employment records. That's not psychiatric delusion, that's documentable fact. Dr. Walsh agreed to investigate. Over the following 2 weeks, her inquiry revealed several disturbing facts. Dr. Amanda Rivera had never been employed by St. Mercy Hospital. Her medical license had been revoked in 2007 for falsifying death certificates in Illinois. Yet she'd somehow signed 9 death certificates in Pennsylvania in November 2008. The families of all 9 deceased patients had never been contacted by the hospital. According to their statements, they'd been trying to reach their relatives for weeks before learning of their deaths through county burial notices. Margaret Santos had submitted resignation paperwork on November 13, 2008, the day before Ward C closed. Her resignation included a forwarding address in Florida, but no one at that address had ever heard of her. Most significantly, St. Mercy's internal investigation revealed that someone had accessed the hospital's employment database multiple times in November 2008, creating and deleting employee records for several people who'd never actually worked there. On March 15, 2009, the FBI opened a formal investigation into systematic Medicare fraud at St. Mercy Hospital. The investigation revealed that Margaret Santos was actually Margaret Santos Rivera, Dr. Amanda Rivera's daughter, and both women were part of an organized scheme targeting Medicare and Medicaid patients at multiple hospitals. The scheme worked by identifying profitable long-term care patients whose families were geographically distant or estranged. Margaret would gain employment at target hospitals, systematically eliminate selected patients using methods that appeared to be natural deaths, then falsify family contact information to prevent burial arrangements. Dr. Rivera would sign fraudulent death certificates, and the bodies would be buried as county indigents while the hospital continued billing Medicare for continued care of patients who were actually dead. St. Mercy Hospital's administration had unknowingly provided the perfect cover by announcing Ward C's closure. The scheme operators had planned to eliminate a final group of patients, then disappear during the confusion of the ward closure. But Dr. Sarah Chen's investigation had forced them to accelerate their timeline and improvise psychological manipulation tactics to discredit her testimony. The FBI investigation ultimately revealed that the scheme had operated at 7 hospitals across 4 states, resulting in an estimated 47 deaths and $3.2 million in fraudulent Medicare billing. Margaret Santos Rivera was arrested in Costa Rica in June 2009. Dr. Amanda Rivera was found dead in a Chicago apartment, apparent suicide, with a note confessing to her role in the Medicare fraud scheme. St. Mercy Hospital faced significant penalties for inadequate employee screening and record-keeping failures that had allowed the scheme to operate. James Morrison and Dr. Elizabeth Grant were cleared of criminal involvement but lost their positions due to administrative failures. On September 14, 2009, exactly 10 months after Ward C's closure, Dr. Sarah Chen received a formal apology from the State Medical Board, a settlement from St. Mercy Hospital, and an offer to return to work at the hospital. She declined the job offer. Instead, Sarah opened a private practice specializing in patient advocacy and medical ethics consulting. She worked with families who suspected their relatives had received inadequate hospital care, and she trained medical staff to recognize signs of systematic patient abuse. But 30% of the case remained unsolved, and it haunted her. The person who had left the note in her medical textbook was never identified. Someone had known enough about the scheme to direct her to the cemetery records, but had chosen to remain anonymous rather than come forward directly. More troubling, The FBI investigation revealed that the Medicare fraud scheme had been operating for at least 3 years before Ward C. How many other patients had died? How many other hospitals had been infiltrated? How many other healthcare workers had noticed suspicious patterns but been discredited or intimidated into silence? And most disturbing of all, Margaret Santos Rivera had been remarkably skilled at psychological manipulation. She'd convinced Dr. Chen that people who didn't exist were real, that conversations that never happened had occurred, and that evidence she'd never seen was genuine. If the cemetery records hadn't provided concrete proof, Sarah would have remained convinced that her memories were psychiatric delusions. The case raised questions that extended far beyond a single hospital ward. In an era of corporate healthcare, budget pressures, and complex bureaucracies, how many other systematic abuses were hiding behind administrative confusion and psychological manipulation? Dr. Sarah Chen never found complete answers to those questions. But she never stopped asking them. December 2015, 7 years later. Dr. Sarah Chen received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the Miami Herald dated November 2015. Former hospital employee dies in apparent suicide. Note references unspecified medical crimes. The deceased was identified as Patricia Williams, age 43, former ICU nurse. The suicide note, partially quoted in the article, included the phrase, "The doctor in Pennsylvania was right. Some of us were never supposed to exist." Attached to the clipping was a handwritten note. Dr. Chen, Patricia Williams, was the real nurse whose identity Margaret Santos assumed at St. Mercy. She'd been threatened into hiding for 7 years. Yesterday, she decided she couldn't live with the fear anymore. There are others still hiding. The scheme was bigger than anyone discovered. Thank you for being brave enough to ask questions when no one else would. The families of the 47 confirmed victims at least got justice because you refused to accept that your memories were delusions. The friend who left you the cemetery note. Sarah kept the note in her desk drawer, next to a photo of Ward C from November 13, 2008, the last night it existed. In the photo, taken by hospital security cameras, a lone figure in scrubs walked down the darkened hallway at 11:47 p.m. The figure's face wasn't clearly visible, but Sarah knew it was Margaret Santos, making her final rounds before disappearing forever. Sometimes, late at night in her office, Sarah wondered how many other Margaret Santos were working in hospitals across the country. How many other Ward CS were scheduled for closure? How many other doctors would be told their memories were psychiatric delusions when they started asking the wrong questions? She never found out. But she never stopped looking. Stories like Ward C remind us that sometimes the most unthinkable crimes hide behind institutional authority and psychological manipulation. If this investigation into medical corruption resonated with you, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Because some truths only surface when enough people refuse to accept official explanations.